Well, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin has once again stepped into the breach to defend what's left of American civilization from the onslaught known as the $3.5 trillion stimulus bill, because there are so many stimulus bills that keep getting passed by Congress, going back to early 2020 when Trump was in office, and now continuing through when Biden's in office. And each successive stimulus bill has to get bigger and bigger, and it gets stuffed full of more and more ridiculous things that nobody reads. And finally, Joe Manchin, West Virginia Democrat senator, an old-timey Democrat in that, West Virginia used to be a deep blue state, and the politics of the Democratic Party changed in such a way that West Virginia is now a deep red state, but Joe Manchin is trying desperately to hang on to his political position there. Supposedly he wants to run for governor. I think he was already the governor of Virginia sometime in the past, and so he has an incentive to not go along with the National Democratic Party and instead try and just do things that would keep him in the good graces of the people of West Virginia. And so he's written an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, which was published about an hour ago, and he's saying, nope, is too much. He has been voicing concerns over inflation and the Fed recently, which, hey, better late than never. A lot of us have been doing that for many, many years. I'm glad to see that there's some folks in Congress who are starting to think, hey, maybe this whole Fed thing has gone a little too far. Joe Manchin makes the case that all of this deficit spending is what's creating the inflation, the consumer price inflation that is causing so much trouble for so many people across the country. I think that he's correct in that. He basically is, just sounds kind of reasonable. There's nothing groundbreaking or incredibly, interesting about his op-ed. He's not an interesting guy. He's not super deep, but he's not insane. And so what does this mean moving forward? You could say, oh, well, it's a political loss for the Dems, but I really, when it comes to economic matters, I don't care about this stuff. There are other people who can talk about that. It doesn't matter to me. Minuscule importance relative to the actual impact of this on the economy. And that is because ever since the lockdowns of March 2020, the U.S. economy, in real terms, I think the private sector collapsed something like 20%. And if you notice, the overall gross domestic product did not collapse 20%. In fact, the gross domestic product, the GDP, is, I think, has already fully recovered and is now, again, moving higher. It was a very sharp but brief dip in GDP, and that's because all of the GDP that was lost, all of the private production that was destroyed and permanently stunted by the lockdowns, has been replaced on paper by government deficit spending. All of this deficit spending is supposed to make up for, on paper, the lack of economic activity in the private sector. And so since, our GDP is being supported now by spending which is not in any way tied to production, the actual real level of production in the country is significantly lower than it was prior to March 2020. Yet our GDP has not fallen. Spending in the country has not fallen. Personal incomes have risen. The result is that the fewer goods that are left being produced are going to be higher in price. And so, as I, and I'm sure plenty of other people, it doesn't take a genius to figure this stuff out, have said in the past, Congress has the tiger by the tail right now. They can choose to either continue to inflate prices in the economy in order to levitate GDP and prevent a real recession, the recession that we should have had as a result of, the government destroying the U.S. economy, or the cost of living can just keep going up. I feel like I lost my train of thought there. I might have repeated myself, but so let me restate this just in case what I just said was a garbled mess. The choice that Congress has: continue inflating money by continuing to pass ever larger stimulus bills to prop up our fundamentally damaged economy, to try and paper over the collapse in production in the private sector, or you stop doing that, and we enter the real recession, and all of the damage that exists under the surface is revealed. Although everybody can pretty much see it right now anyway. Anyone who works in the private sector, you can see how hard it is to get things done, how hard it is to get materials, how hard it is to find employees who want to work. Even if your business is booming in the sense that, oh gee, I'm having so much trouble just filling all my orders, and I've got so many customers, yet I have so little inventory. It's not that you have necessarily such an increase in in your business as it is you have a difficulty in producing things. And of course, it is a little bit of both. I mean, there is more demand in absolute terms too, but it feels like a lot more of an uptick in in consumption, in demand from consumers, because there is so much less for them to consume to begin with. And so the longer this goes on, the more and more problems we run into, the more that these fundamental problems continue to pile up and compound on one another. And therefore, the greater and greater the government deficit spending has to become in order to fill that gap in between what the real economy is capable of producing at any given moment and where the politicians want the GDP to print. Now, with that said, Manchin blocking one $3.5 trillion stimulus bill, which would, I believe, be by far the largest in history. That in and of itself is not going to lead us into the real depression, but it is a start if this can continue to happen. Now, do I think that Joe Manchin now has drawn his line in the sand and he'll never vote for a stimmy bill again? Probably not. I think that they'll find some way to get him back to the table and get him to say yes, because he's not a man of principle or anything like that. He's speaking common sense now, but how long will that last? You can never be certain. At the end of the day, nobody can trust Joe Manchin, whether you are hoping for Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi to succeed, which, I mean, even amongst Democrats, it's got to be a pretty small group of people, or you are rooting for them to fail. Joe Manchin is not going to be a reliable ally for anyone. Joe Manchin is going to do whatever best serves the interests of Joe Manchin. Now, from my perspective, I'm unsure what I would prefer as far as this particular bill. Do I think that it's better that Congress just goes off the deep end and as quickly as possible spends more and more money and just really actually gets inflation cartoonishly high? And I shouldn't even say cartoonishly, 1970s levels of high, because at that point it would be, I think that would be a game changer for, pardon the cliche, for American society to see double-digit, sustained inflation. So maybe it's better that Congress rips the Band-Aid off, because I don't think that Congress is going to allow a deflationary collapse, which must happen. I feel that Congress is going to just try and print their way out of any pain. And so by Joe Manchin vetoing this, he may just be delaying the inevitable. Maybe after this, we get a 5% pullback in the stock market, and then the Democrats and the Republicans will come together and say, you know what, I mean, this is outrageous. We can't we can't keep putting off this $3.5 trillion stimulus bill. We got to get it out now. My stocks are down 5%. Honestly, that's what I see happening. The stock market's been very quiet lately. Things have been rosy and great, and so Joe Manchin feels like he has some wiggle room to come in and put his foot down and say, you know what, maybe we need to be a little more responsible with how we spend money that we don't have. But there will be a lot of pressure on him and on Republicans. So even if Joe Manchin holds his ground, you might get Republicans crossing the aisle to vote for something like this if you see a mild pullback 1 week or so in the stock market. I won't even say a correction. There's no way we're getting to a correction, in this era. That's just simply not permitted. A 10% drop. I don't remember when the last one was, but I don't expect to see another one anytime soon if Congress and the Fed have anything to say about it. But I do firmly believe that George Gammon was correct a long time ago when he said that the Fed put was over and that the Fed on its own, is incapable of continuing to prop all this up. They've jawboned themselves to, not to death, but I think that Jerome Powell's jaw has gone numb a long time ago, and so he's relying on Congress to jawbone for him in the form of stimulus bills. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.